Hi, I'm Natalie. 3 days before Christmas, my sister Vanessa walked into my living room while my kids were decorating cookies and announced that Santa Claus was a lie. Parents tell to manipulate children. She watched my 7-year-old Logan's face crumble as she explained how reindeer can't actually fly and chimneys are too narrow for fat men in red suits. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Vanessa didn't know was that I'd been carrying a secret about her own children for 2 years, one that would make her perfect Christmas morning explode into 1,000 pieces. But the real gift wasn't the truth I was about to unwrap. It was watching someone who thought they controlled everyone finally lose control of everything. Stay tuned, because what happened next made her beg me to keep quiet in front of the entire family. The December wind in Portland carried the scent of pine needles and wood smoke as I pulled into my driveway that Tuesday evening. Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline of our modest craftsman home, casting warm pools of red and gold across the front porch. Inside, the house hummed with holiday energy. Marcus had started a fire in the living room, and the smell of cinnamon rolls baking filled the kitchen. Logan and Sophia had spent the afternoon stringing popcorn garlands, leaving a trail of kernels across the hardwood floor like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and paused to listen. Sophia's voice drifted from the kitchen, serious and focused as she explained to her younger brother the proper ratio of frosting to sprinkles for sugar cookies. At 9, she approached everything with the intensity of a scientist, measuring ingredients with the precision of someone who believed rules mattered. Logan, meanwhile, had already abandoned measurements entirely, creating what he called explosion cookies covered in enough decorations to feed a small village. This was my favorite part of December, not the presents or the parties, but these quiet moments when the house felt wrapped in its own magic. The tree stood in the corner of the living room, a 6-foot noble fir we'd chosen together at the lot on Hawthorne Boulevard. Ornaments hung at child height, clustered in enthusiastic bunches rather than evenly spaced, each one placed with the careful consideration of small hands making big decisions. Marcus looked up from his laptop as I entered the kitchen, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He worked as a software engineer for a local startup, and even during the holidays, code had a way of following him home. But tonight he seemed relaxed, content to let the children's chatter fill the spaces between his thoughts. "How was your day?" he asked, closing the laptop and giving me his full attention. This was one of the things I loved most about him after 8 years of marriage. He still asked questions like he genuinely wanted to hear the answers. "Busy," I said, stealing a warm cinnamon roll from the cooling rack. The clinic was packed. Everyone wants their dental cleanings finished before New Year's. I worked as a dental hygienist at a practice downtown, and December always brought a rush of patients trying to maximize their insurance benefits before the calendar reset. Sophia appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her dark hair and a smear of green frosting on her cheek. "Mom, Logan put gummy bears on his cookies, and now they look like they have eyeballs." "Eyeball cookies sound perfectly festive," I said, ruffling her hair. "Very Halloween meets Christmas." "That's not a real holiday," she protested, but she was smiling. The doorbell rang, cutting through our conversation like a blade through wrapping paper. Marcus glanced at the clock above the stove, 6:30 on a Tuesday evening, 3 days before Christmas. We weren't expecting anyone. "I'll get it," I said, but the door was already opening. Vanessa had a key, of course. She'd had one since Marcus and I bought the house 5 years ago, back when I still believed family meant people who supported each other instead of people who shared the same last name by accident of birth. "Knock knock," she called, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted everyone to know she was doing something generous. "Hope you don't mind the surprise visit." Tyler and Chloe burst through the door ahead of her, 8 and 6 years old respectively, their cheeks flushed from the cold air. They wore matching red coats and moved with the kinetic energy of children who'd been cooped up in a car. Behind them, Derek followed with the resigned expression of a man who'd learned not to question his wife's spontaneous decisions. "Aunt Natalie," Chloe launched herself at my legs with the enthusiasm of a small torpedo. Tyler, more reserved like his father, offered a shy wave before gravitating toward the kitchen where he could hear Logan's voice. Vanessa swept into the living room like she owned it, her designer boots clicking against the hardwood. She wore a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her blonde hair fell in perfect waves despite the December humidity. At 35, she was 2 years older than me, and had never let me forget it. I was in the neighborhood, she said, though we both knew she lived 20 minutes away in West Lynn, where the houses had 3-car garages and homeowners associations that regulated the color of your front door. Derek had a work thing canceled, so I thought we'd pop by and see what the kids were up to. Derek nodded his greeting to Marcus, and the two men retreated to the living room with the practiced ease of husbands who'd learned to navigate their wives' complicated relationship by staying out of the way. They'd discuss work and sports while pretending not to notice the undercurrents flowing between their wives like electricity before a storm. "We're making cookies," Sophia announced, appearing beside me with a mixing bowl clutched against her chest. "Want to?" "Oh, sweetheart," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I don't really do messy activities, but it looks like you're having fun." The children disappeared into the kitchen, their voices blending into a happy chaos of instructions and laughter. Chloe wanted to make star-shaped cookies. Tyler suggested they try to make cookie versions of their pets. Logan insisted they needed to create an entire cookie village with houses and people and cars made of frosting. I moved to follow them, but Vanessa caught my arm. "Actually, Nat, I wanted to talk to you about something." There it was, the real reason for the surprise visit. Vanessa never dropped by just to chat or spend time with the kids. She came when she wanted something, when she had an agenda that required my participation or agreement. "What's on your mind?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. She glanced toward the kitchen, where the children's voices had grown louder with excitement. "It's about Christmas, and all this Santa nonsense." My stomach tightened. "What about it? Don't you think they're getting a little old for fairy tales?" Her voice carried that reasonable tone she used when she wanted to sound like the mature, sensible sister. "I mean, Logan's 7, Sophia's 9. At some point, we need to prepare them for reality. They're children. Vanessa, they're supposed to believe in magic for a few more years." "Magic?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is that what we're calling lies now? Because that's what Santa is, Nat. It's a lie we tell children to make them behave, and then we wonder why they have trust issues later." From the kitchen came the sound of a timer beeping, followed by Sophia's voice directing everyone to step back from the oven. The ordinary sounds of family life, of childhood unfolding in cookie crumbs and sticky fingers, and the belief that tomorrow might bring something wonderful. "They'll figure it out on their own eventually," I said. "Kids always do. But right now they're happy, they're excited. Why would you want to take that away?" Vanessa's expression shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something harder underneath the perfectly applied makeup. "Because someone needs to teach them that the world doesn't revolve around what makes them happy. Better they learn it from family than from strangers." The words hung between us like smoke from a extinguished candle. This was the philosophy that had guided Vanessa through life, the belief that happiness was a luxury, that children needed to be prepared for disappointment by being disappointed early and often. She'd applied the same logic to her own kids, Tyler and Chloe, who'd learned to moderate their excitement and temper their expectations. "I disagree," I said simply. "Of course you do." She straightened her coat, preparing for the performance I could see building behind her eye. "You always were the soft one. Mom used to say you'd spoil your children if you ever had any." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Our mother, Helen, had died 3 years earlier, and Vanessa had a habit of invoking her memory whenever she wanted to win an argument. As if the dead could speak for themselves, as if death had somehow validated every harsh word our mother had ever spoken. "Mom said a lot of things," I replied. "Not all of them were worth remembering." Vanessa's eyes flashed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I asked softly, "In your heart, what feels true to you?" He considered this with the seriousness of someone being asked to make an important decision. Around us, the kitchen held its breath. Even Vanessa had gone quiet, perhaps realizing for the first time the magnitude of what she'd done. "I think, Logan said slowly, that magic might be real even if Santa isn't. Like maybe the magic is in believing. Maybe the magic is in being excited for Christmas morning and wanting to give people presents and thinking that something wonderful might happen. My heart broke and swelled at the same time. 7 years old, and he was already wiser than most adults I knew. I think you might be right, I said, pulling him into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and childhood and the last moments before everything changed. But as I held my son close, I found myself looking at Vanessa over his head. She stood there in her perfect coat with her perfect hair, satisfied with the chaos she'd created. She thought she'd won something, taught some valuable lesson about truth and reality. What she didn't know was that I'd been carrying my own truth for 2 years now, a secret that would make her perfectly ordered world explode just as thoroughly as she'd just exploded my children's Christmas dreams. The difference was, my truth wasn't about magic or fantasy, or stories we tell children to help them sleep at night. My truth was about lies adults tell themselves to avoid facing what they've done. And unlike Santa Claus, my truth had DNA evidence to back it up. That night, after the children had been tucked into bed with extra hugs and reassurances about Christmas still being magical even if some things weren't exactly as they'd imagined, I sat in the darkness of our bedroom staring at my laptop screen. The blue glow illuminated my face as I scrolled through a folder I'd created 2 years ago and labeled Medical Records MISC. Innocent enough that Marcus wouldn't think twice if he happened to see it. Specific enough that I'd remember what it really contained. The house had settled into its evening quiet. Marcus was downstairs double-checking that the doors were locked and the coffee maker was set for morning, his nightly routine as predictable as sunrise. Down the hall, Logan's breathing had finally evened out after 20 minutes of sniffling into his pillow, and Sophia had stopped asking questions about whether the tooth fairy was also just parents sneaking into bedrooms at night. I clicked on the folder and watched as the files populated on my screen. Lab results from Providence Medical Center, DNA analysis from a private testing facility in Beaverton, photographs taken with a telephoto lens that I'd borrowed from Christina, my friend who worked as a freelance photographer, email exchanges that I'd screenshotted and saved to an encrypted drive. It had started innocently enough, the way most family secrets do. A casual comment at Tyler's 6th birthday party 2 years ago, when Derek mentioned that Tyler had inherited his mother's artistic abilities, but couldn't draw a straight line to save his life. Vanessa had laughed and said something about how genetics were funny that way, how sometimes children looked nothing like their parents. But Tyler looked exactly like someone, just not Derek. I'd noticed it first at that birthday party, watching Tyler blow out his candles while surrounded by both sides of the family. The way he tilted his head when he concentrated, identical to Ryan Mitchell from Vanessa's old job at the marketing firm downtown. The same unusual green eyes that shifted between blue and gray depending on the light. The same left-handed way of holding a crayon that I'd seen Ryan demonstrate when he'd helped design the invitations for Vanessa's baby shower 8 years ago. At the time, I'd dismissed it as coincidence. Children often resembled family friends or distant relatives. Genetics could skip generations, surface in unexpected combinations, but the resemblance had grown more pronounced as Tyler aged, and my suspicions had crystallized into certainty during a chance encounter at Pioneer Courthouse Square, the previous spring. I'd been downtown for a dental conference, walking toward the food trucks for lunch, when I spotted Ryan Mitchell sitting alone at a picnic table. He was older than I remembered, his brown hair showing traces of silver at the temples, but his face was unmistakably the template from which Tyler had been cast. Same nose, same chin, same way of rubbing his left temple when he was thinking. I'd taken a photo before I could stop myself, using my phone's zoom function to capture his profile. Later, I'd placed it side by side with a recent picture of Tyler from Sophia's birthday party, and the resemblance had been undeniable. Not just similar, identical. That's when I'd hired Christina to do some discreet surveillance, professional-grade equipment, telephoto lenses, the kind of documentation that would hold up under scrutiny. She'd asked minimal questions, understanding that family drama sometimes required evidence, and I'd paid her in cash to ensure there was no paper trail leading back to me. The photos she'd taken told a story that Vanessa had apparently thought was buried in the past. Ryan entering and leaving Vanessa's favorite coffee shop on Southeast Division, always alone, always looking like a man carrying the weight of secrets. Vanessa's car parked outside his apartment building on Tuesday afternoons, when Derek was at work and the children were at school. Hotel receipts that I'd found crumpled in her purse during a family barbecue, from a boutique inn in Hood River, where she claimed to have attended a women's retreat. But the real evidence was genetic. Hair samples collected from Tyler's brush during a sleepover at our house. DNA testing done through a private lab that guaranteed anonymity and accepted payment through cryptocurrency. Results that confirmed what I'd already suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. Tyler Coleman was not Derek's biological son. The father listed on his birth certificate was legally and emotionally accurate, but scientifically false. Derek had raised Tyler from birth, loved him unconditionally, never questioned the timing of Vanessa's pregnancy, or the early arrival of a supposedly premature baby who'd weighed 7 pounds and showed no signs of developmental delay. But Tyler had been conceived 3 months before Vanessa claimed, during the height of her affair with Ryan Mitchell, an affair that had apparently ended when she'd chosen financial security with Derek, over whatever passion she'd shared with a man who worked in graphic design and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I closed the laptop and set it on my nightstand, my hands trembling slightly from adrenaline rather than uncertainty. For 2 years I'd carried this knowledge like a stone in my chest, never sure what I was supposed to do with it. Vanessa's marriage seemed stable. Derek adored Tyler and treated him like his own flesh and blood because, as far as he knew, that's exactly what Tyler was. The boy himself was happy and well-adjusted, secure in his family identity. What purpose would destroying that serve? What good could come from shattering a child's understanding of who he was and where he came from? But tonight, after watching Vanessa systematically destroy my children's Christmas joy for no reason, other than her own twisted sense of superiority, I finally understood what this information was meant for. Not revenge, exactly, just the kind of cosmic balancing that ensured people who shattered other families eventually faced the consequences of their own deceptions. Marcus climbed the stairs quietly, probably assuming I was already asleep. He moved through our bedroom with the careful precision of someone trying not to disturb a partner, but I could feel his tension even in the darkness. The evening had shaken him too, though for different reasons than it had affected me. "You awake?" he whispered, settling onto his side of the bed. "Yeah." I turned toward him, grateful for the darkness that hid my expression. "I keep thinking about Logan's face when she told them." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried an edge I rarely heard. "What she did tonight was cruel, deliberately cruel. There was no reason for it, except to hurt them. She said someone had to tell them the truth. Bullshit." The profanity was unusual for Marcus, who typically chose his words carefully around family matters. "She wanted to ruin their Christmas because she can't stand seeing other people happy. She's always been that way, even when we were dating in college." I'd forgotten that Marcus had known Vanessa before he'd known me, back when we were all students at Portland State and the world had seemed full of infinite possibility. They'd dated briefly during their sophomore year, nothing serious, but long enough for him to understand her character in ways that I sometimes missed. "What was she like then?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Marcus shifted beside me, his weight causing the mattress to dip slightly. "Competitive. Everything was a contest she had to win. If someone got a better grade, she'd find ways to diminish their achievement. If someone was dating someone attractive, she'd flirt with them just to prove she could. It wasn't enough for her to succeed. Other people had to fail." The description aligned perfectly with the sister I'd grown up with, but hearing it from Marcus's perspective added new dimensions to my understanding. Vanessa's cruelty wasn't personal, exactly. It was pathologic, a deep-seated need to elevate herself by tearing others down. "Why didn't you warn me about her when we started getting serious?" I asked. "Would you have listened?" Marcus's voice carried gentle humor. "You were so determined to believe the best about your family, and honestly, I hoped she'd grown out of it. People change sometimes, but Vanessa hadn't changed. If anything, marriage and motherhood had amplified her worst tendencies, giving her new arenas in which to compete and compare. Her house was bigger than ours, her children more accomplished, her husband more successful. She collected superiority like trophies, displaying them prominently whenever she felt threatened or insecure. "I need to tell you something," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could reconsider them. Marcus went still beside me. What kind of something? The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or abandon. Once I shared this secret, there would be no taking it back. Marcus would become complicit in my knowledge, forced to carry the weight of Vanessa's deception whenever he looked at Derek or Tyler. But keeping secrets had poisoned enough relationships in our family. Whatever happened next, I wanted my husband to understand why I was making the choices I was about to make. Tyler isn't Derek's son, I said quietly. The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to wonder if Marcus had fallen asleep, if my confession had somehow failed to register. Then he exhaled slowly, a sound that carried understanding rather than surprise. Ryan Mitchell, he said, and it wasn't a question. I turned toward him sharply, though I could barely make out his profile in the darkness. You knew? I suspect. Tyler looks exactly like him, and the timing of Vanessa's pregnancy never quite added up. She said he was premature, but he was too developed, too healthy. Plus, Vanessa was working late a lot that winter, and Ryan was always the one staying behind to help her with projects. Why didn't you ever say anything? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his words. What was I supposed to say? Derek's happy, Tyler's happy. Vanessa made her choice. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss, and sometimes it's just another word for cowardice. The harshness in my voice surprised both of us. Marcus reached for my hand in the darkness, his fingers warm and familiar against mine. What are you planning to do? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be nothing. I don't know yet, I lied. But after tonight, after what she did to Logan and Sophia, I can't just pretend I don't know anymore. Marcus squeezed my hand gently. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But think carefully about the collateral damage. Tyler and Chloe didn't choose their mother any more than you did. He was right, of course. Children were always the innocent casualties in adult wars, and my conflict with Vanessa had the potential to destroy Tyler's entire understanding of his identity. But then I thought about Logan's tear-streaked face as his belief in Christmas magic crumbled, about Sophia's careful neutrality as she tried to navigate the wreckage her aunt had created. Sometimes adults needed to face consequences for their actions, even if those consequences rippled outward in ways that hurt innocent people. The alternative was allowing cruel people to continue causing damage because they'd hidden behind children as shields. I fell asleep that night with Marcus's hand in mine and my laptop humming quietly on the nightstand, its hard drive full of evidence that could change everything. In my dreams, I was 7 years old again, watching Vanessa blow out the candles on a birthday cake while I sat forgotten in the corner, invisible and unimportant. But this time, when she made her wish, nothing happened. This time, the magic belonged to someone else. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with frost painting delicate patterns across our bedroom windows. I woke to the sound of children's voices downstairs, quieter than usual but carrying the resilience that kids possess in abundance. Logan was asking Marcus about pancakes, and Sophia was reading aloud from a book about winter animals. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel confident without appearing overdressed. Dark jeans, a burgundy sweater that Marcus had given me for my birthday, boots with enough heel to add authority to my step. Today felt like a day that would require armor, even if that armor looked like ordinary Wednesday clothing. Downstairs, the children were eating breakfast with the focused intensity of people trying to pretend everything was normal. Logan had arranged his pancakes into a snowman shape, using blueberries for buttons and bacon strips for a scarf. Sophia had cut hers into precise triangles and was eating them in order from smallest to largest. "Morning, beautiful," Marcus said, kissing my cheek as I poured coffee into my travel mug. He was dressed for work but moving with the unhurried pace of someone who planned to arrive late. "Sleep okay?" "Better than expected," I said, which was true. Once I'd decided what I was going to do, the insomnia that had plagued me for months had finally loosened its grip. "What's your schedule like today?" "Meetings until 3, then I can work from home if you need me to pick up the kid." I shook my head. "Christina's picking them up. We're going to finish our Christmas shopping." Another lie, but a necessary one. What I actually planned to do required privacy and careful timing. Logan looked up from his pancake snowman, syrup glistening on his chin. "Will you get something for Aunt Vanessa?" Even though she was mean about Santa, the question hit me like a physical blow, not because of its innocence, but because of its generosity. 7 years old, and Logan was already practicing the kind of forgiveness that most adults struggled to achieve. He was willing to extend kindness to someone who had deliberately hurt him, simply because she was family. "We'll see, buddy," I said, kneeling down to wipe the syrup from his face. "What do you think she would want?" Logan considered this with the seriousness of someone tasked with solving a complex problem. "Maybe something to make her less sad." "Less sad? She must be really sad inside if she doesn't want kids to believe in magic," he said. "Happy people don't try to make other people unhappy." From the mouths of babes, Logan had articulated something that had taken me 33 years to understand. Cruelty usually stemmed from pain, and pain made people do terrible things to avoid feeling vulnerable. Vanessa's need to control and diminish others wasn't really about superiority. It was about fear, but understanding someone's motivations didn't excuse their behavior, and it certainly didn't protect their victims from the damage they caused. Compassion had its place, but so did accountability. After Marcus left for work and the children were settled with their morning cartoons, I retrieved my laptop and opened the folder one more time. The evidence was all there, meticulously documented and impossible to DNA results, photographs, hotel receipts, surveillance footage that Christina had captured using motion-activated cameras. I copied everything onto a secure USB drive, then created a second backup that I stored in our safety deposit box at the bank. Whatever happened next, I wanted to ensure that the truth couldn't be lost or destroyed. My phone buzzed with a text message from Vanessa. "Hope the kids are feeling better about Christmas today. Sometimes the truth is hard but necessary. Maybe we can get together this weekend to talk about how to handle Santa questions going forward." The casual presumption that she would have any say in how I raised my children made my hands shake with rage. Vanessa had appointed herself the family's moral authority, the one who decided when children were old enough for harsh realities, and which illusions needed to be shattered for their own good. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on something neutral. "We'll see how everyone's feeling," but even as I sent the message, I was already planning my next move. The Brooks family Christmas Eve dinner was still 3 days away, hosted as always by Uncle Paul at his sprawling house in Lake Oswego. The entire extended family would be there, aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents, family friends who'd been attending the gathering for decades. It would be the perfect stage for the kind of revelation that Vanessa specialized in delivering. Public enough to ensure maximum impact, formal enough to prevent escape, witnessed by enough people to guarantee that the truth couldn't be buried or denied. If Vanessa wanted to discuss the importance of honesty and the value of facing reality, I was more than happy to facilitate that conversation. But this time, she wouldn't be the teacher, she'd be the student, learning exactly what happened when someone's carefully constructed lies finally met someone else's meticulously documented truth. I spent the afternoon making phone calls and sending emails, setting pieces in motion with the precision of someone who'd had 2 years to plan for this moment. A conversation with Christina about borrowing additional camera equipment, an appointment with a family attorney who specialized in paternity cases, a request for expedited DNA analysis from the private lab that had processed my original samples. By evening, everything was in place. The trap had been set with the same methodical care that Vanessa brought to her own schemes, and the bait was irresistible. The promise of another family gathering where she could demonstrate her superiority and share her wisdom about the importance of truth. She had no idea that this time, the truth she was so eager to discuss would be her own. Christmas Eve morning arrived with a blanket of fresh snow that transformed Portland into something out of a holiday postcard. The children woke early, their excitement about the evening's family dinner temporarily overshadowing the lingering questions about Santa that Vanessa had planted 3 days earlier. Logan spent an hour at the living room window watching snowflakes drift past the glass like tiny dancers performing just for him. I moved through the morning routine with deliberate calm, making breakfast and helping the children choose their outfits for Uncle Paul's dinner while my phone buzzed periodically with text messages from various family members. Aunt Claire confirming the time. Cousin David asking if he should bring extra folding chairs. Vanessa sending a photo of Tyler and Chloe in matching red velvet outfits with the caption "Ready for family time." The casual cheerfulness of her message might have fooled someone who didn't know what I knew, but I could see through the performance now. Vanessa approached family gatherings like military campaigns, every detail planned to showcase her success and highlight other people's shortcomings. The matching outfits weren't about holiday spirit. They were about demonstrating her superior organizational skills and financial resources. Marcus worked from home that morning, ostensibly to handle last-minute client issues, but really to provide moral support for what he knew was coming. We'd talked late into the night about contingency plans and possible outcomes, gaming out scenarios like generals preparing for battle. He'd offered to stay home entirely, to claim illness and remove our family from the gathering altogether, but I'd refused. Running away would only delay the inevitable confrontation, and it would give Vanessa time to prepare new defenses or find ways to discredit whatever evidence I'd collected. The element of surprise was crucial. She needed to be caught off guard, surrounded by witnesses, unable to retreat into her usual repertoire of manipulation and deflection. "You sure you're ready for this?" Marcus asked as he helped me load the car with presents and side dishes for the dinner. The snow had stopped falling but left everything pristine and glittering, the kind of winter wonderland that usually filled me with peace. Today it felt more like a stage set waiting for the curtain to rise. "As ready as anyone can be for destroying their sister's life," I said, then immediately regretted the bitter edge in my voice. "Sorry, I'm nervous." Marcus closed the trunk and pulled me into a hug that smelled like coffee and his familiar cologne. "You're doing the right thing." Vanessa made her choices. "You're just making sure she faces the consequences. What if Tyler asks questions I can't answer? What if Derek has some kind of breakdown? What if the whole family turns against me for bringing this up? Then we'll deal with it together," Marcus said simply. "But you can't protect people from the truth forever. And after what she did to Logan and Sophia, she lost the right to expect protection from you." The drive to Lake Oswego took 40 minutes through neighborhoods that grew progressively more expensive as we moved away from our middle-class enclave. Uncle Paul's house sat on 2 acres overlooking the lake, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion that had been in the Brooks family for 3 generations. Every December it transformed into something out of a magazine spread, with professional decorators and catered dinners and enough twinkling lights to power a small city. Cars already filled the circular driveway when we arrived. I recognized Derek's black BMW and Vanessa's white Mercedes, along with vehicles belonging to various aunts, uncles, and cousins. Through the tall windows I could see figures moving around inside, the warm glow of interior lighting making the house look like a beacon against the snowy landscape. "Remember," I told Logan and Sophia as we walked toward the front door, "no matter what happens tonight, your dad and I love you very much." And sometimes adults have difficult conversations that don't have anything to do with children. "Are you and Aunt Vanessa going to fight?" Sophia asked with the directness that 9-year-olds brought to uncomfortable situations. "We're going to have a discussion about honesty," I said carefully. "It might get a little intense." Logan slipped his hand into mine, his small fingers warm despite the cold air. "Will it be worse than when she told us about Santa?" The question broke my heart and strengthened my resolve in equal measure. "No, sweetheart. This time the truth is going to help people instead of hurting them." Uncle Paul answered the door himself, a 70-year-old man with white hair and kind eyes, who'd stepped into the role of family patriarch after our father's death 5 years earlier. He gathered us into bear hugs that smelled like pipe tobacco and peppermint, his genuine warmth a stark contrast to the performance anxiety that typically characterized Brooks family gatherings. "Natalie, my dear, you look lovely, and Marcus, good to see you. How's the tech business treating you?" He ruffled Logan's hair and complimented Sophia's dress, then ushered us into the foyer where a massive Christmas tree dominated the space like a glittering monument to holiday excellence. The house buzzed with conversation and laughter, the kind of carefully orchestrated merriment that wealthy families specialized in creating. Children raced through the rooms playing elaborate games of hide and seek while adults clustered in groups, discussing real estate values and vacation plans, and which restaurants had the best wine lists. I spotted Vanessa immediately, holding court near the fireplace in the main living room. She wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her hair had been professionally styled into an elaborate updo that showcased diamond earrings I'd never seen before. She was telling some story about Tyler's recent academic achievements, her voice carrying just far enough to ensure that nearby conversations would pause so people could listen and offer appropriate praise. Tyler and Chloe sat on a nearby couch, still wearing their matching red velvet outfits, but looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention their mother was drawing to them. Tyler in particular seemed subdued, his green eyes focused on his hands rather than the adults discussing his grades and extracurricular activities. Natalie, Vanessa spotted me across the room and waved with theatrical enthusiasm. "Come tell everyone about Logan's art project, the one that won second place in his class contest." The casual diminishment was vintage Vanessa acknowledging an achievement while simultaneously undermining it. Logan had actually won first place, but correcting her would make me look petty and defensive. Instead, I smiled and navigated through the crowd, accepting hugs and exchanging pleasantries while keeping one eye on the leather portfolio tucked under my arm. "Actually," I said when I reached Vanessa's circle, "I brought something to share with everyone tonight." "Don't. Not right now." The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to release the tension that had been building in the room. Conversations erupted in low, urgent whispers as family members tried to make sense of what had just happened. Some people looked at me with expressions of shock and disapproval. Others stared at Vanessa with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. Tyler remained in his seat, his young face pale and confused. "Mom?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "What's everyone talking about? Why is Dad upset?" Vanessa looked at her son, then at me, then at the folder of evidence that had just demolished the carefully constructed narrative of her life. For the first time since I'd known her, she appeared to be completely out of words. "Your mom can explain everything to you," I said gently, collecting the photographs and documents and returning them to the portfolio. "She's very good at explaining difficult truths to children. Aren't you, Vanessa?" I stood up and walked around the table to where Marcus was already rising to join me. We gathered our coats and called for Logan and Sophia, who appeared reluctantly from whatever game they'd been playing in the living room. "Are we leaving already?" Sophia asked, noticing the tension in the adult faces around her. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, helping her into her jacket. Sometimes family dinners end early when people have important things to discuss. As we made our way toward the front door, I could hear Vanessa's voice behind us, high and defensive, as she tried to explain to Uncle Paul and the other family members that the situation was more complicated than it appeared, that there were extenuating circumstances, that Ryan had pursued her, that Derek had been distant, that mistakes had been made, but that didn't diminish her love for her family. But the damage was done. The truth was out, witnessed by 24 people who would carry the story forward long after Christmas Eve had become a painful memory. Vanessa's reputation as the family's moral authority was destroyed, replaced by the reality of a woman who'd built her superiority on other people's ignorance of her own failures. Outside, the snow had begun falling again, fat flakes that caught the light from the house's elaborate decoration. Our car was cold and Marcus started the engine to warm it up while the children buckled themselves into their seats. "Did something bad happen?" Logan asked as we pulled out of the driveway. "Something true happened," I said, watching Uncle Paul's house disappear behind us. "And sometimes truth feels bad at first, but it usually makes things better in the long run. Like medicine," Sophia observed. "It tastes awful, but it helps you get well." "Exactly like that," I agreed. As we drove home through the quiet streets of Lake Oswego, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace, not the smug satisfaction of revenge, but the deeper calm that came from finally setting down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. Vanessa would have to face the consequences of her choices now, just as Derek and Tyler would have to navigate the wreckage of their shattered assumptions about family and identity. It wouldn't be easy for any of them. But sometimes the truth was the only gift that mattered, even when it came wrapped in pain and delivered at the worst possible moment. Sometimes, especially then, Christmas morning arrived with an eerie silence that felt nothing like the holiday chaos I'd grown accustomed to over the years. No frantic phone calls from family members comparing gift exchanges or coordinating afternoon visits. No text messages from Vanessa critiquing other people's wrapping paper choices or sharing photos of her children's perfectly arranged presents. Just the soft whisper of snow against our windows and the distant sound of church bells marking the passage of a day that would forever divide our family's history into before and after. Logan and Sophia crept into our bedroom at dawn, their faces carrying the tentative excitement of children who weren't quite sure if Christmas still worked the same way after everything that had happened. I pulled them both into bed between Marcus and me, their warm bodies fitting perfectly into the spaces we made for them, and for a few minutes we simply lay there watching the gray winter light filter through the curtains. "Is Santa still coming even though Aunt Vanessa said he wasn't real?" Logan whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow make the magic more fragile than it already was. "What do you think?" I asked, smoothing his hair away from his forehead. "Do you feel any Christmas magic in the house?" He considered this seriously, tilting his head to listen for sounds that might indicate mysterious overnight visitors. From downstairs came the subtle electronic beeping of our coffee maker starting its automatic cycle, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked at something only it could see. "I think maybe Christmas magic is different than we thought," Sophia said with the wisdom of someone who'd spent considerable time thinking about complex problems. "Maybe it's not about one person bringing presents. Maybe it's about families wanting to make each other happy." "That sounds like a very wise theory," Marcus said, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. "Should we go downstairs and test it?" The living room looked exactly as we'd left it Christmas Eve morning, with wrapped packages arranged under the tree and stockings hanging from the mantelpiece like colorful promises waiting to be fulfilled. But something fundamental had changed in the 24 hours since we'd carefully arranged everything with such hopeful precision. The presents were the same, but the people opening them had been transformed by knowledge they couldn't unknow. My phone sat silent on the kitchen counter, its screen dark and innocent. Usually Christmas morning brought a steady stream of messages from extended family members sharing photos and updates from their own celebration. This year the device remained stubbornly quiet, as if the entire Brooks family had collectively decided that communication was too dangerous in the aftermath of revealed secrets. We opened presents slowly, savoring each moment with the deliberate attention of people who understood that traditions could be fragile things. Logan discovered a remote-controlled helicopter that Marcus had hidden in the basement for 3 weeks. Sophia unwrapped a set of art supplies that included pencils in colors she'd never seen before. Marcus opened a book about sustainable architecture that I'd chosen because he'd mentioned it months earlier in passing conversation. Everything felt both completely normal and utterly changed, like looking at familiar objects through different colored glass. The gifts were the same ones we'd chosen weeks ago, but they carried new weight in a world where family relationships had been permanently altered by DNA evidence and public revelations. Around 10 o'clock, my phone finally buzzed with an incoming call. Christina's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with genuine relief at hearing from someone who existed outside the complicated dynamics of family loyalty and betrayal. "Merry Christmas," she said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "I hope I'm not interrupting present open." "Perfect timing, actually. The kids are playing with their new toys and Marcus is making his famous Christmas pancakes. What's going on?" Christina was quiet for a moment, and I could hear traffic in the background suggesting she was calling from her car. "I've been getting some interesting phone calls this morning. Apparently word about last night has spread beyond your immediate family." My stomach clenched with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "What kind of phone call?" "The kind that happen when people want to know if the photographer who documented someone's affair might have additional information for sale." I've had 3 separate inquiries since 8 o'clock this morning, all from numbers I don't recognize, all asking very specific questions about my professional services and client confidentiality policy. I stepped out onto our back deck, where the snow had created a pristine landscape that looked untouched by human drama. The cold air bit at my face and hands, but I needed the privacy and the clarity that came from being surrounded by winter silence. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I told them I don't discuss client work," and hung up. "But Natalie, these weren't casual calls. These were people who knew exactly what they were looking for, and had the resources to pay well for it. I think someone is trying to do damage control, and they're starting with the evidence." The implication was clear. Vanessa hadn't spent Christmas morning wallowing in shame or contemplating the error of her ways. She'd spent it on the phone with lawyers and private investigators, people who specialized in making inconvenient truths disappear, or become so legally complicated that they lost their power to inflict damage. "Did they sound threatening?" I asked. "Not threatening exactly. More like business propositions, the kind of offers that suggest someone has done this before and knows how to make problems go away quietly." One caller mentioned that family disputes often benefited from professional mediation rather than public documentation. I leaned against the deck railing, watching a cardinal land on the bare branches of our maple tree. The bright red bird looked impossibly vivid against the white snow, a splash of color in a landscape that had been drained of its usual warmth and complexity. "I should probably warn you that this might get more complicated before it gets simpler," I said. "Vanessa doesn't handle losing gracefully, and she has access to resources that most people don't. I figured as much when I saw that house last night. Mercedes in the driveway, designer everything. The kind of jewelry that costs more than my annual income. Women like that don't usually accept public humiliation without fighting back." We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters like document security and communication protocols, the kind of boring logistics that became crucial when family disputes escalated into legal warfare. Christina promised to route any future calls through her attorney and to make copies of all relevant files in case someone decided that destroying evidence was easier than refuting it. After I hung up, I remained on the deck for several minutes, listening to the distant sounds of Christmas morning in our neighborhood. Children's voices carried on the still air, punctuated by the occasional bark of excitement from dogs discovering new toys. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing Christmas music loudly enough for the melody to drift across the snow-covered yards like an auditory gift shared with anyone willing to listen. Inside, Marcus was plating pancakes shaped like Christmas trees, while Logan and Sophia argued good-naturedly about whether green food coloring made them taste different than regular pancakes. The domestic normalcy felt precious in a way it never had before, as if I was seeing my own life from the outside and recognizing how much I had to protect. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked when I rejoined them in the kitchen. "Christina's been getting calls. People looking for information about the photography work she did for me." Marcus's expression darkened. "Already? It's Christmas morning. Apparently Scandal doesn't observe holidays. Vanessa's mobilizing her resources." I poured myself coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, where Logan was systematically eating his pancake in a spiral pattern that started at the outside edges and worked inward toward the center. The expensive lawyers, investigators, people who make uncomfortable truths disappear for the right price. "Can they actually make this go away?" Sophia asked, proving once again that children heard everything even when adults thought they weren't listening. The question was more sophisticated than most adults would have managed, cutting straight to the heart of what legal maneuvering could and couldn't accomplish when DNA evidence was involved. I looked at my 9-year-old daughter who was eating Christmas pancakes while calmly discussing the mechanics of cover-ups and legal manipulation. "They can make it complicated," I said honestly. "They can create enough confusion and legal obstacles to make people doubt what they saw or convince them that getting involved isn't worth the hassle. But they can't change what actually happened or make scientific evidence disappear. Like when Tommy Morrison said he didn't cheat on the spelling test even though Mrs. Patterson saw him looking at Sarah's paper." Logan asked. "Exactly like that. The truth doesn't change just because someone doesn't like it or has good lawyers." My phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Derek. Can we talk? Not about legal stuff. Just talk." The message felt like a punch to the chest, not because of any animosity in the words, but because of the pain that radiated through them. Derek was Tyler's father in every way that mattered. The man who'd changed diapers and attended school plays and taught a little boy how to ride a bicycle. Now he was trying to navigate a world where biological relationships had been weaponized against emotional ones. I showed the message to Marcus, who read it twice before nodding grimly. You should probably meet with him. He deserves to hear your side of things without Vanessa's interpretation coloring everything. What if it's a setup? What if Vanessa put him up to this to get me to say something that her lawyers can use against me? Then you'll be careful about what you say. But Derek's not the enemy here, Nat. He's collateral damage, just like Tyler. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Selwood, neutral territory that wouldn't carry emotional baggage for either of us. I chose a table near the back where we could have privacy, and Derek arrived exactly on time, carrying the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd spent the night staring at the ceiling instead of sleep. He looked older than he had just 2 days earlier, as if the revelation about Tyler's paternity had physically aged him overnight. His usually immaculate appearance was rumpled and careless, his hair uncombed and his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair across from me with the careful movements of someone whose world had become unpredictable. "I wasn't sure you would." "Of course I would. Derek, I want you to know that I never wanted to hurt you or Tyler. This was never about you." He nodded slowly, wrapping his hands around a coffee cup that he'd apparently forgotten to drink. "I know. I spent all night thinking about it, and I know this was about Vanessa, but I need to understand something. How long have you known?" The question I'd been dreading, because there was no way to answer it that wouldn't make me complicit in years of deception. 2 years. I started suspecting at Tyler's 6th birthday party when someone mentioned that he'd inherited artistic abilities that didn't come from either parent. The resemblance to Ryan became more obvious as he got older. 2 years. Derek repeated the words like they contained some meaning he was still trying to decode. "You knew for 2 years and you didn't say anything." What was I supposed to say? You were happy. Tyler was happy. Vanessa had made her choice and everyone seemed to be building a good life around it. I didn't see what purpose destroying that would serve, until 3 nights ago. When she decided that my children needed to have their Christmas magic destroyed for their own good, when she made it clear that she believed truth was more important than kindness, more valuable than protecting innocent people from unnecessary pain. Derek was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the snow-covered street, where people were walking dogs and carrying shopping bags full of post-Christmas exchanges. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the kind of secrets that could detonate families without warning. "Tyler asked me this morning why everyone was upset last night," he said finally. "He wanted to know if he'd done something wrong, if there was something he should apologize for. 8 years old, and he's trying to figure out how to fix problems that adults create." The image of Tyler blaming himself for the chaos at Christmas Eve dinner made my chest tighten with guilt and anger in equal measure. Children always assumed responsibility for adult failures, as if their love could somehow repair damage they had no part in creating. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that sometimes adults make mistakes and other adults help fix them. I told him that no matter what happened, he was my son and nothing would ever change that." Derek's voice broke slightly on the last words. "But I don't know if that's true anymore. I don't know what Vanessa is going to do or what her lawyers are going to advise, or whether Tyler's going to grow up wondering if the man who raised him actually loves him, or just felt obligated to take care of another man's child." "Derek, you're his father. DNA doesn't change 8 years of bedtime stories and soccer practice and being the person he runs to when he's scared or excited. Ryan Mitchell is a stranger who contributed genetic material. You're the man who built Tyler's entire understanding of what fathers do. Until yesterday I thought those were the same thing." We sat in silence for several minutes. Two people who'd been caught in the crossfire of someone else's war and were trying to figure out how to protect the children we loved from becoming casualties. Through the coffee shop speakers, Soft jazz played at a volume designed not to intrude on private conversations, and around us other customers went about their post-Christmas business with the casual ease of people whose families hadn't exploded overnight. "There's something else you should know," Derek said eventually. "Vanessa hired a law firm this morning, Kellerman and Associates. They specialize in what they call family reputation management." I'd heard of Kellerman and Associates, a boutique firm that catered to wealthy clients who needed legal problems to disappear quietly. Their advertisements never mentioned their actual services, instead using euphemisms like discreet counsel and sensitive matter resolution. What are they planning to do? I don't know all the details. Vanessa's not exactly sharing her strategy with me right now, but I overheard part of a phone conversation this morning, something about challenging the chain of custody on the DNA evidence, and filing harassment claims against anyone who collected or distributed private genetic information without consent. The legal strategy was predictably sophisticated and morally bankrupt. Instead of addressing the underlying truth, Vanessa was attempting to make the evidence inadmissible and criminalize the process of revealing her deception. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could make it legally dangerous for anyone to talk about it. They also mentioned something about Tyler's best interests, Derek continued. How public disclosure of paternity questions could cause psychological damage to a minor child. They're going to argue that keeping this quiet is about protecting him, not protecting Vanessa. And you believe that? Derek shrugged with the resignation of someone who'd spent the night contemplating the complete dissolution of everything he'd thought was solid and permanent. I don't know what I believe anymore. Maybe they're right. Maybe Tyler would be better off never knowing any of this. Maybe the truth isn't always worth the damage it causes. Or maybe, I said carefully, Tyler deserves to grow up in a family where the adults tell him the truth and deal with the consequences like responsible people. Maybe he deserves to know that his father is the man who chose to love him, not the man who happened to contribute sperm during his mother's affair. And maybe he deserves to know that too when he's old enough to handle it, instead of having it revealed during someone else's revenge plot. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to make denial impossible. I had used Tyler's paternity as a weapon against Vanessa, and the collateral damage to an innocent child was a consequence I'd have to live with, regardless of how justified my anger had been. "You're right," I said. "I should have found a way to handle this that didn't involve Tyler getting hurt." But Derek. She wasn't going to stop. She was going to keep hurting people and using her position in the family to justify it. Someone had to hold her accountable. And it had to be someone who knew the truth and cared more about justice than family harmony. Apparently that was me. Derek finished his coffee and checked his phone, where I could see multiple missed calls and unread text messages waiting for his attention. I should get Tyler spending the day with Vanessa's parents, and I need to figure out how to explain why Christmas is going to be different this year. He stood to leave, then paused and looked down at me with an expression that contained more sadness than anger. "For what it's worth, I understand why you did it. I even agree with most of your reasons, but understanding something and forgiving it aren't the same thing." After he left, I remained at the coffee shop for another hour, watching the post-Christmas world continue its routine business while I tried to process the conversation and its implications. Derek was right that I'd used Tyler as ammunition in a war he hadn't chosen to be part of, but he was also wrong about the alternatives that had been available to me. Vanessa hadn't been planning to change her behavior or moderate her cruelty. She'd been planning to escalate it, to use her position as the family's moral authority to justify increasingly harmful interventions in other people's lives. Someone had needed to stop her, and the only weapon powerful enough to do that was the truth about her own hypocrisy. The cost would be measured in Tyler's confusion and Derek's pain and the permanent fracturing of relationships that had taken decades to build. But the alternative would have been years of additional damage to Logan and Sophia and whatever other children Vanessa decided needed her particular brand of tough love. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How did it go?" I typed back, "Complicated, heading home now. Kids are napping. I made soup, The promise of soup and sleeping children and a husband who understood why I'd made impossible choices felt like everything I needed in that moment. I gathered my coat and keys and stepped back out into the cold afternoon air, where snow was beginning to fall again in fat, lazy flakes that caught the light like tiny stars. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and legal strategies and the complex machinery of reputation management that wealthy families deployed when their secrets became public knowledge. But today was still Christmas. And I still had a family that chose to love each other despite the complications that blood relationships could create. That seemed like magic enough for anyone. 3 weeks into January, the snow had mostly melted from Portland's streets, leaving behind the gray slush and bare patches that marked winter's slow retreat toward spring. I stood at the kitchen window watching Logan build what he called a snow rescue mission in our backyard, using the last remnants of Christmas snow to construct an elaborate fort complete with tunnels and lookout posts. Sophia sat nearby with her sketchbook, drawing detailed architectural plans for improvements to his design. Their resilience never failed to amaze. Children possessed an almost supernatural ability to absorb trauma and keep moving forward, finding joy in simple pleasures even when the adult world around them had been turned upside down. They'd adapted to the new reality where family gatherings were smaller and certain names weren't mentioned during dinner conversation, accepting these changes with the same matter-of-fact attitude they brought to weather patterns or school schedule modification. My phone buzzed with a text from Christina. "Coffee? I have updates." We met at our usual spot in Hawthorne, a small cafe that specialized in fair trade everything, and attracted the kind of customers who typed novels on vintage laptops while nursing single cups of coffee for hours. Christina arrived carrying a manila envelope thick enough to suggest significant developments in whatever legal maneuvering had been happening behind the scenes. "The good news is that Kellerman and Associates withdrew their harassment claims," she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from me with the efficiency of someone who'd grown accustomed to delivering complex information quickly. Apparently, their research into Oregon's genetic privacy laws revealed that everything we did was completely legal, and filing frivolous charges would have opened them up to sanctions. I felt tension I hadn't realized I was carrying begin to ease from my shoulders. And the bad news is that they've shifted to a different strategy entirely. Instead of trying to suppress the evidence, they're embracing it. Vanessa's telling people that she always planned to tell Derek about Tyler's paternity, that she was just waiting for the right time, and that your public revelation was a vindictive attack that forced her to have difficult conversations prematurely. The audacity was breathtaking, even by Vanessa's standards. She'd transformed herself from deceiver to victim, from someone who'd hidden the truth for 8 years to someone who'd been planning all along to reveal it at the appropriate moment. The narrative recast me as the villain who'd stolen her agency and damaged her family through impatience and spite. "Is anyone actually believing that?" I asked. Christina shrugged. "Some people believe what they want to believe, especially when the alternative is admitting they've been fooled for years. Others are choosing sides based on factors that have nothing to do with truth or evidence. Family loyalty, social connections, who has more money to loan or favors to grant." She opened the envelope and withdrew a set of photographs that I recognized immediately. Surveillance shots of Vanessa and Ryan that Christina had taken during their investigation, showing them entering and leaving hotels, embracing in parking lots, sharing intimate conversations over coffee. The images that had convinced me Tyler's resemblance to Ryan wasn't coincidental. "Here's where it gets interesting," Christina continued. 3 days ago, Ryan Mitchell received a visit from Kellerman and Associates. They offered him a substantial sum of money to sign a legal document stating that any relationship he had with Vanessa ended before Tyler was conceived, and that he has no interest in pursuing paternity claims or contact with the child. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. If Ryan could be convinced to deny paternity, then Tyler's resemblance to him became meaningless coincidence rather than genetic evidence. The DNA results I'd obtained would be dismissed as fraudulent or contaminated, and Vanessa's version of events would become the only official narrative. What did he say? That's where it gets really interesting. Ryan didn't just refuse their offer, he hired his own attorney and filed for paternity testing through the court system. Apparently he's been thinking about Tyler for years, wondering if the timing of Vanessa's pregnancy aligned with their relationship, and your revelation convinced him to stop wondering and start demanding answers. I stared at the photographs, trying to process the implications of this development. Ryan's decision to pursue legal paternity recognition would create a three-way custody battle between Derek, Vanessa, and a biological father who'd been excluded from his son's life for 8 years. Tyler would be caught in the middle of a legal war between adults, who each had legitimate claims to different aspects of his identity. "There's more," Christina said, withdrawing another document from the envelope. Derek filed for divorce yesterday. Irreconcilable differences, with a request for primary custody of Tyler based on Vanessa's history of deception and poor judgment. He's arguing that Tyler's emotional well-being requires stability and honesty, both of which are better provided by the man who's actually been his father for 8 years. The legal proceedings were becoming exactly the kind of public spectacle that Uncle Paul had tried to prevent by suggesting we handle family matters privately. Court documents would become public record, creating a permanent archive of the Brooks family's dysfunction that reporters and gossip columnists could access indefinitely. "How is Tyler handling all of this?" Christina's expression softened. "According to my sources, he's struggling but not falling apart. Derek's been taking him to a child psychologist who specializes in family transition. The professional opinion is that children are remarkably adaptable when the adults in their lives are honest with them and prioritize their emotional needs over legal victory." I thought about Tyler's quiet demeanor during family gatherings, the way he'd always seemed more observant than other children his age. Perhaps some part of him had always sensed that the official story of his origins didn't align with the evidence his own instincts provided. Children were more perceptive than adults usually gave them credit for, especially when it came to detecting inconsistencies in the narratives that shaped their understanding of themselves. "What about Vanessa? How is she responding to all of?" "Publicly, she's maintaining that she's the victim of a coordinated attack by bitter family members and an opportunistic ex-lover. Privately, according to people who know her, she's having what can only be described as a complete breakdown. She's been calling family members at all hours, alternating between fury and desperation, demanding loyalty and threatening to cut people out of her will if they don't support her version of events." The image of Vanessa frantically trying to control a situation that had spiraled completely beyond her influence satisfied something vindictive in my nature that I wasn't entirely proud of. But it also made me sad in ways I hadn't anticipated. Watching someone self-destruct, even someone who'd caused considerable damage to other people, wasn't as satisfying as I'd expected it to be. "She called me last night," I said, though I hadn't planned to share this information with anyone. 3 o'clock in the morning, completely hysterical, screaming about how I'd destroyed her family for revenge, how Tyler was going to grow up traumatized and confused because I couldn't let sleeping dogs lie. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing." I listened for about 30 seconds, then hung up. "But Marcus thinks we should change our phone number and maybe install better security at the house. He's worried that her desperation might escalate into something more dangerous than late-night phone calls." Christina nodded grimly. "Desperate people make unpredictable choices. You might want to document any contact she attempts, just in case her lawyers decide to claim harassment or intimidation from your side." We finished our coffee while discussing practical matters like legal precedents and evidence preservation, the mundane logistics that accompanied extraordinary family disaster. When we parted ways, Christina handed me a final envelope containing copies of all the documentation we'd assembled, including Ryan's recent court filings and Derek's custody petition. "Whatever happens next," she said, "you did the right thing. Tyler deserves to grow up knowing the truth about where he came from, and Derek deserves to build his relationship with Tyler on honesty instead of deception." Vanessa's breakdown is unfortunate, but it's the consequence of choices she made long before you got involved. Driving home through the gray January afternoon, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that December evening when Vanessa had walked into my kitchen and destroyed my children's Christmas magic. The revelation about Tyler's paternity had accomplished its intended purpose of holding her accountable for years of casual cruelty, but the aftermath had proven more complex and far-reaching than I'd anticipated. Logan and Sophia were waiting for me when I arrived home, full of questions about my mysterious afternoon errand and eager to share updates about their snow fort construction project. Their excitement was infectious, pulling me back into the immediate concerns of childhood. where architectural engineering and hot chocolate preparation took precedence over legal strategies and family warfare. "Mom, we need more supplies for the fort," Logan announced with the seriousness of a military commander requesting reinforcements. "Specifically, we need flags and maybe some kind of communication system between the different sections. And we need to solve the drainage problem before the next big rain," Sophia added, showing me detailed sketches of proposed improvements. "The current design doesn't account for water runoff, and the whole structure could collapse if we get significant precipitation." Their absorption in creative problem-solving reminded me why I'd been willing to risk family relationships to protect them from Vanessa's particular brand of truth-telling. Children needed magic and wonder and the freedom to build imaginary worlds without adults constantly reminding them of limitations and disappointment. They would learn about harsh realities soon enough without having those lessons forced on them prematurely by people who confused cruelty with wisdom. Marcus arrived home as we were designing flag systems for the snow fort, carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and the kind of deliberately cheerful energy that meant he had news he wasn't sure how to share. We waited until after dinner, when the children were absorbed in a documentary about Arctic animals, to discuss whatever developments he'd learned about during his day. "I ran into Derek at the grocery store this afternoon," he said, settling beside me on the couch with a cup of tea that he held like a shield against difficult conversations. "He looked better than I expected, considering everything that's been happening. How is Tyler doing?" According to Derek, surprisingly well. The therapy sessions are helping him process the idea that families can be more complicated than traditional definitions suggest, and that biology doesn't determine emotional relationships. Tyler's biggest concern seems to be whether this means Derek loves him less, and Derek's been very clear that nothing could change his feelings about his son. The reassurance that Tyler was navigating this transition without permanent psychological damage lifted a weight from my chest that I'd been carrying since Christmas Eve. My decision to expose Vanessa's deception had been motivated by protection for my own children, but Tyler's collateral suffering had haunted my conscience for weeks. "What about the legal situation?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Derek thinks the custody battle will be resolved fairly quickly. Ryan's paternity claim is mainly symbolic. He wants legal recognition but not visitation rights or parental responsibilities. He's been very clear that Tyler already has a father and doesn't need another one disrupting his life." "And Vanessa?" "Derek thinks she'll eventually accept a shared custody arrangement that prioritizes Tyler's stability over her need to control every aspect of his upbringing. Her lawyers have apparently advised her that fighting for primary custody would require demonstrating that Derek is an unfit parent, which would be impossible given his 8-year track record of excellent fathering." 6 months later, as spring transformed Portland into a city of blooming trees and optimistic gardeners, I received an unexpected phone call from Uncle Paul. He'd maintained diplomatic neutrality throughout the family crisis, offering support to everyone involved without taking sides or passing judgment on anyone's choices. "I have a proposal," he said after exchanging pleasantries about weather and work and the children's end-of-school activity. "I'd like to host a small gathering next month, nothing elaborate, just immediate family for a barbecue in the backyard. I think it's time we started rebuilding some of the connections that got damaged during the winter." The invitation was both generous and complicated. Accepting would mean potential contact with Vanessa for the first time since Christmas Eve, along with all the emotional landmines that such an encounter might trigger. Declining would mean continued estrangement from extended family members who'd been caught in the crossfire of our conflict. "Will everyone be there?" I asked, though we both knew I was really asking about Vanessa's attendance. "Everyone's invited," Uncle Paul said diplomatically. "Whether everyone chooses to attend remains to be seen. But I think Tyler would benefit from seeing that his extended family is still intact, even if some relationships need time to heal." I discussed the invitation with Marcus and the children, weighing the potential benefits against the possible complications. Logan and Sophia were enthusiastic about the prospect of seeing their cousins and playing in Uncle Paul's expansive backyard. Marcus was cautiously optimistic that enough time had passed for civil conversation, if not genuine reconciliation. The gathering turned out to be smaller than Uncle Paul had hoped but larger than I'd feared. Derek attended with Tyler, who seemed more confident and relaxed than I'd seen him in months. Ryan Mitchell was notably absent, having apparently decided that legal paternity recognition was sufficient without pursuing social integration into Tyler's extended family network. Vanessa arrived late, alone, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast afternoon and maintaining careful distance from everyone except Tyler and Chloe. She looked thinner than I remembered, her usual polished appearance replaced by something more fragile and uncertain. When she spoke, her voice lacked its customary authority, suggesting that 6 months of legal battles and social consequences had fundamentally altered her understanding of her place in the family hierarchy. The afternoon passed without major confrontations or dramatic revelations, though conversation remained carefully neutral and nobody addressed the underlying tensions that had brought us to this point. Tyler played with Logan and Sophia as if nothing had changed, their friendship uncomplicated by adult grudges and legal proceedings. As the gathering wound down and families began preparing to leave, Vanessa approached me near Uncle Paul's garden shed where I was helping collect forgotten toys and empty plates. "I want you to know that I understand why you did it," she said without preamble, her voice barely audible above the sound of children's laughter from the backyard. "I don't forgive you for the way you did it, but I understand why you felt like you had to." The admission was as close to an apology as I expected to receive, acknowledging wrongdoing without accepting full responsibility for the consequences that had followed. It was vintage Vanessa, offering just enough contrition to appear reasonable while maintaining plausible deniability about her own culpability. "Tyler seems happy," I said, choosing to focus on outcomes rather than motivations. "Derek's done an amazing job helping him navigate everything." "Derek's a good father," Vanessa agreed, and for the first time in our conversation her voice carried genuine emotion instead of calculated performance. "Tyler's lucky to have him. Luckier than he would have been with Ryan, probably luckier than he would have been with me, making all the decisions about his life." The confession surprised me with its honesty and self-awareness. Vanessa had always struggled to admit mistakes or acknowledge limitations in her judgment. Her recognition that Tyler's well-being had actually benefited from the revelation of truth, despite the initial trauma, suggested genuine growth rather than strategic positioning. "Families are complicated," I said. "Sometimes the truth makes things worse before it makes them better. And sometimes people who think they're protecting others are really just protecting themselves from having difficult conversations," Vanessa replied, her words carrying weight that extended beyond Tyler's paternity to encompass years of family dynamics built on avoidance and willful ignorance. We stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching our children play together with the unself-conscious joy that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture. The crisis that had divided our family was slowly transforming into something more sustainable, not the artificial harmony that had existed before, but honest relationships based on mutual understanding rather than shared pretense. "Logan asked me last week if Santa was real," I said as we began walking back toward the house. "I told him that Santa was a story that helped people practice kindness and generosity, and that sometimes stories could be more true than fact." Vanessa smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her all afternoon. "That's actually a pretty good answer, better than mine was. He still believes in magic though. He just understands now that magic comes from people choosing to love each other, not from mysterious strangers who only visit once a year." "Maybe that's the better kind of magic anyway, Vanessa, the kind that doesn't depend on keeping secrets or pretending things are different than they really are." As we rejoined the rest of the family for final goodbyes and promises to stay in better touch, I reflected on how much had changed since that December evening when Christmas magic had collided with uncomfortable truth. The children were wiser but not cynical, the adults were more honest but not cruel, and the family was smaller but more authentic. Tyler hugged Derek with the fierce affection of a child who understood exactly who his father was, and why that relationship mattered more than genetic coincidence. Logan and Sophia chattered excitedly about summer plans and upcoming birthdays, their resilience having transformed winter trauma into spring wisdom. Sometimes the most important gifts came wrapped in pain and delivered at the worst possible moment, but they were still gifts, still capable of creating the kind of magic that lasted longer than any story about flying reindeer or workshop elves. The magic of truth, forgiveness, and families that chose to love each other despite the complications that honesty inevitably revealed. Up next,
You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.